If you're looking for great books to read to improve your craft of writing, I have 3 of them right here for you. Save the Cat, Stephen King's On Writing, and Truth is the Arrow, Mercy is the Bow. In this video, I'm going to give you the 3 takeaways I got from each of these books. If you're new here, my name is Aaron. I'm a 3-time self-published author, and on this channel, I discuss the writing process as well as document my journey towards becoming a traditionally published author. First, I'll give you a quick overview of the 3 different books, and then we'll dive straight into the lessons. Save the Cat by Blake Snyder is a 2005 book on screenwriting, but it is commonly given to writers in general. It mainly focuses on plot and story structure. On Writing by Stephen King was published in 2000, and it is half autobiography, half discussion on the craft of writing. It is commonly referenced as an absolute must-read when it comes to improving your writing craft, and a lot of the common advice you hear get thrown around comes from his notes in this book. Finally, Truth is the Arrow, Mercy is the Bow by Steve Almond. It is the best book I found that actually dives into what to do for the different parts of a story, whether it's characters or chronology or diving into emotional depth and hooking readers. This book is amazing, and I just happened to stumble across it in the bookstore. First up is Save the Cat. There's another version specifically focused on novel writing called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I haven't read it, but I can assume it's the same information, more specifically applied to writing a book. The biggest takeaway from this is the holy Bible of story structure. I absolutely pantsed my way through my story, but I still found it very helpful to have read this book and to know the general beats that it follows. There are 15 main beats that get used frequently in Hollywood blockbusters that he talks about, such as that opening scene or Fun and Games, the Dark Night of the Soul, the finale. He breaks each of these down, and even if you don't have to follow it exactly as though it's a prescription, but it's very much like a version of the hero's journey. So if you're familiar with that, you'll find this is similar in a lot of ways. And it's just really nice to have this as a reference in the back of your mind. You don't need to follow it one for one. It's just a framework that you can build your story around. It is a proven structure to stories that people like, that can be adapted to any genre. You can still have twists and flips and turns. It doesn't mean your story is going to be super formulaic, but especially if you have no idea what you're doing, this is an absolute, like I said, the Bible of story structure. The second takeaway I got from this book was the different story types that he discussed. Now, when I'm talking about story types, I'm not talking about genre. So I'm not saying this is a horror or this is a fantasy or a sci-fi. Those are more of the theme and the flavor that gets put around a story, but the heart of the story is what he's talking about here. So a few examples of this are Monster in the House, buddy romance, or wish fulfillment. As he goes through each of these story types with examples, you can start to think of the story you want to build and whether it fits into one of these story types or if it's a combination of multiple story types to, again, help you find a common structure to build your story off of in a productive way that doesn't feel too constricting. The third and final takeaway I got from this book is that it is immensely popular. Like I said, it's recommended all the time for writers, screenwriters, whatever, which means that there is a bazillion templates. I think there's an official Save the Cat template you can get, but I know basically every author YouTube out there has their own version of a story structure. A lot of them are like, oh, here's a Save the Cat beat sheet that you can fill out alongside your novel. I didn't necessarily use these templates myself, but it's really nice that they're available and out there. And when I was thinking about writing out my story, even though I pantsed it, it was still really nice to say, here are common things that would be good to hit along the way. Here's a shape I can follow. I don't have to follow it exactly. I can weave and bend around. But as I'm thinking what might happen, instead of just saying, oh, they go and they do this, and then they get ice cream, and then a bad guy comes, and then they go whatever, it says I can still do whatever I want, but put it kind of in these boxes to make it all flow together. Next up is Stephen King's On Writing. And I will say this as someone who I don't think I've ever read one of his books. I don't think I've even seen any movies based on his books. But he's clearly a very successful, very prolific author. And this book is recommended all the time. So I decided it was worth checking out to see what all the hype is. As I mentioned previously, the first half of the book is just about his life and how he got into writing and his journey. And the second half of the book talks more specifically about writing as a craft. I really enjoyed reading it and just seeing how he puts sentences together and just to learn a little bit more about his background. Because as I said, I know of him, obviously, but I don't really know much about him. He talks about the struggles and drug addiction and letting writing overtake your life. Overall, it's just really is a fantastic book, and I would highly recommend it. The first lesson or takeaway that I got from this book is that rejection and failure are completely normal. And most of us have heard this before, but this book really hammers it in. He started from very humble beginnings and would send out his stories to magazines, short stories into magazines and all this. And it's kind of a bit of a myth and a lore. I mean, it's true. Around writing and failure, but he would take his rejection letters and pin them onto his wall, eventually building up such a huge stack of rejections that he had to get a bigger nail so that they could all fit without falling off, which I think is really great and inspiring, just to see that even someone who now is regarded, whether you like him or not, regarded as one of the top writers of this generation, the last generation. And to see that he started out failing and collecting failures and collecting rejection letters, so that when you get to the point of collecting rejection letters, hopefully it stings a little bit less, because every major author, all of your favorite authors, have dealt with the exact thing that you're feeling in that moment. The next takeaway I got from this book is don't make writing the absolute center of your life. And it's been probably about 6 months so I read this, so I'm a little fuzzy on the details. But I know that he now makes a point not to put his desk in the center of the room, because he doesn't want that to be the center of his life. He makes sure to put his desk in a corner or on the wall, which might be a little bit extreme, but when you're at his level, maybe it makes a lot more sense. I just got a text. The guy who's working on my car is done. I'll be right back. All right, $1,000 later, and my truck is running great again. So, fun stuff. So I was talking about how he had to make a decision not to make writing the center of his life. And I found that really important, because he dives into drug addiction and alcohol abuse and all of these things. I think it's really important as upcoming authors and writers that we try to take heed of this wisdom, because it's really easy to want to pour everything into our manuscript because it's our baby and we want to succeed. We want to be that best-selling New York Times author. But it is really good at the end of the day to remember, family and your life comes first, and there's more to it than just writing. Even if it's your passion, you cannot always put that first and neglect your health and your other responsibilities. Finally, the third lesson is adverbs. The advice to never use adverbs, I think, originated from this book. That's not confirmed. But he does talk about heavily limiting the use of adverbs that you use. And he explains it a little more in depth and even points out in a few cases. One thing that is pretty neat about this book, let's see if I can find it quickly. Yeah, is it shows like how he would make corrections. So his own scribbles onto it and all that. And he even points out at one point is, see right here, there was an adverb that I just couldn't get rid of. Like, it's okay to use them sometimes. And really the biggest problem with them is that they can be a crutch for weak writing. And if you're able to replace it and say the sentence more strongly, do that. But at the end of the day, if you use adverbs, everyone uses adverbs. It's a part of our speech. There's nothing wrong with it. Use them if you have to, replace them when you can. Done. Finally, truth is the arrow, mercy is the bow. As I mentioned in the intro, this book of all the three, I think is the most practical if you have no idea anything about how to write a novel. It is broken down into sections of what goes into a story. So on developing characters, on developing plot, chronology, narrator, getting people hooked. In all of these sections, it gives examples from famous books, from books you haven't heard of, and explains what works and why it works, as well as just being an entertaining read. I cannot recommend this enough. The first lesson I got from this book is dealing with hard scenes or difficult, tough emotions, and wherein it's not necessarily about what you say and how much saying all of it into words. It's about what you don't say and letting the reader fill in the gaps from their own experiences of grief, of sadness, of heartbreak. You don't have to spell out every single detail. You need to just paint the picture and let them draw on their raw experiences to experience it through your characters. He gives an example from a story about a mother rocking her child to sleep and singing to them every night, and then as it grows up and the child becomes a man, and then he, as his mother's dying, I think, sings her a song as she passes, something like that. But anyway, then it says when the man got home, he stood at the top of the stairs for a long time. Something like that. And Steve Allman kind of explains, what's going through his head at that point. He could dive into the specific details of every emotion he's feeling, but just with that and knowing what happened, you can experience it very succinctly in your own personal way. The next lesson is about the characters' obsessions and to make them absolutely obsessed with something, because it's not nearly as interesting to read about someone who has a mid-interest or passion towards something, or is pursuing something half-heartedly and then is able to stop. No, we want to read compelling stories about characters who are driven forward to act in this way. They're just so obsessed with it, and they can't change direction. This is the path that they feel thrust upon. It comes down to just having more interesting characters doing the things that they feel driven to do, because a lot of the times us people in real life world might not always be able to do the things. Like we might not be able to quit the job or to ask that person on a date, to take the risk and to follow our obsessions, which is why that makes it so much more compelling to read about somebody who does. It's almost a fantasy fulfillment in a way, vicariously through seeing these people chase and follow their obsessions. Whatever it is, whether they want to be a professional boxer or they want to open a bakery, something, I don't know, random examples, but you get the idea that it's really is a good thing, unless you have a specific reason for it, to make your characters obsessed with their goal. The last takeaway deals with opening paragraphs and getting readers hooked into your story. He discusses how writers might want a different type of story opening than readers. Writers might be more focused on establishing intimacy and opening with a razzle-dazzle action scene or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But readers, as he discusses, what they really want is the promise of a good story. They want to know who they should care about and what that person cares about. Do your opening paragraphs offer the reader a sense of direction and context as to where the story is headed? He believes it's important that authors not be afraid to go big in the beginning. If you save a huge reveal or twist until 30, 40, 50% of the way through the book, you might lose people before they get to that point. And not that your efforts are wasted, but then they don't get to experience it. So instead, don't spoil it, don't give everything away, but go big at the beginning. Just say, this is who the book is about. this is what's happening. It's very, I think, what he's trying to say, similar to writing a blurb or a query letter. You have to say, this is the character, this is the goal they are trying to achieve, here are the obstacles in their way, and these are the consequences if they fail. If you can lay some of those things out in your opening paragraphs, he's saying you will be very well set up to have the promise of, as Brandon Sanderson says, the promise of a premise and the promise of a good story. The opening paragraphs are also where you demonstrate the voice and the tone of the novel. Again, just showing the readers what they're in for, and they're quickly going to determine whether they want it or not. But don't dilly-dally, don't beat around the bush, just go in. If you're going to make someone dislike it, make them hate it instead. Or if they're going to like it, make them love it. Go all in. If you're looking to improve your writing craft, I highly recommend these 3 books, among others. And if you're in the middle of editing your first draft and are looking for tips, check out this video here.